Have you ever poured every piece of yourself into something? Your time, your hands, your history, your heartbreak, and watched someone treat it like garbage, right in front of your eyes? Have you ever stood in a room full of people and realized, in one cold, clarifying moment, that the danger you feared was even worse than you imagined? That's exactly what happened in this true story. My name is Gloria. I'm using a different name here, so let's call her Carol. I'm 42 years old, and I have been the head kitchen manager at Jefferson Elementary School for 15 years. That is the professional way to say it. Most people say lunch lady. I have made peace with that. I have made peace with a lot of things over the course of my life, including the fact that I will smell faintly of garlic bread no matter how many times I shower. I have scrubbed with lemon juice. I have tried baking soda. I spent $14 on a soap that promised to eliminate cooking odors entirely. My car still smells like an Olive Garden parking lot on a Friday night. I have accepted this about my life. I drive a 2011 Ford Escape with a dent in the passenger door that has been there since 2019, when I misjudged a post at the Walgreens drive-thru. I keep saying I'll get it fixed. I will not get it fixed. At this point, the dent and I have reached an understanding. It is not a flaw. It is a feature. It is proof that I keep moving forward even when I bump into things. I had my daughter Lily, we'll call her Maya. When I was 19 years old, I was terrified and broken completely, helplessly in love with her father Danny, let's call him Ray, who worked construction and came home every evening smelling like sawdust and cheap soap, and who kissed Maya's forehead before he ever kissed mine. Ray died when Maya was 7. Car accident on the interstate. One sentence. That's all I'm going to give that, because if I give it more, it swallows everything else. And this story is not about Ray. This story is about what I built after he was gone. What I built with my own 2 hands alone. While the world kept moving and I had a 7-year-old who needed her mother to stay standing. My mother helped me raise Maya. My mother, let's call her Rose, was a housekeeper for 30 years. Hotel rooms, office buildings, private homes. She had hands like sandpaper and opinions like concrete. She left me 2 things when she passed 5 years ago. A cast iron skillet and a duplex on a quiet street across town that she had purchased with 3 decades of hard, invisible labor. I season that skillet every Sunday. I manage that duplex like it is a second child. My mother used to say, a cast iron skillet doesn't work if you rush the seasoning. She was talking about patience. She was talking about everything. She was talking about the long game, the kind of game that most people don't have the stomach for because they want results before they've put in the work. Let me tell you something about first impressions. People think first impressions are about what a person says to you. They're not. They're not about the handshake, the smile, the compliment about your home. First impressions are about what a person looks at first when they walk into a room. Do they look at the people? Do they look at the furniture? Do they scan the exits? In my experience, the ones who look at the furniture first are the ones keeping score. And the ones keeping score are the ones you should watch most carefully. Marcus, we'll call him Marcus, Maya's husband, looked at my kitchen the way you'd look at a waiting room, like he was just passing through. He married my daughter 3 years ago. He is 31, works in commercial real estate, wears watches that cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, and has a handshake that lasts exactly 1 second too long. Just enough to make you feel like you've been measured and filed away. He is polished in the way that certain men are polished, which is to say the polish is the entire project. There is nothing underneath it. Just more polish and the expectation that no one will ever scrape the surface hard enough to find that out. I noticed things from the very beginning. I noticed the way he corrected Maya's pronunciation at dinner once, gently with a smile, the way you'd correct a small child who didn't know better. I noticed the way he introduced me to his mother as Maya's mom, instead of by my name. I noticed the way he never once asked me what I did for a living, because he already knew and had already decided it didn't matter. I said nothing about any of this. You mothers know exactly what I mean. You watch. You catalog. You wait for your daughter to see it on her own, because if you say it first, you become the problem. You become the difficult one. You become the mother who never liked him from the start. So you keep quiet and you keep your eyes open and you hope. The Sunday phone calls started getting shorter about 18 months ago. Maya used to call me every Sunday morning at 9 o'clock without fail. We'd talk for an hour. What she cooked that week, what happened at work, whether she was still reading the book I'd recommended. Then the calls dropped to 40 minutes. then 30, then 20. And she'd say things like, "I should go. Marcus is making breakfast," in a voice that didn't sound like a woman whose husband was making her breakfast. It sounded like a woman whose husband was standing in the doorway. I noticed. I am a woman who notices. Maya got pregnant 7 months ago. She told me on a Sunday call that ran exactly 22 minutes. I had started timing them without meaning to. She sounded happy, really genuinely happy, and I was happy for her. I was so happy that I cried in my car afterward, sitting in the Jefferson Elementary parking lot before my shift, with my hands over my mouth so no one walking past the window would see. I started the quilt the next day. I want you to understand what this quilt was. It was not a craft project. It was not something I did to fill time or to have something to wrap the baby in. Every single square was cut from something that mattered. A square from Maya's first baby blanket, the yellow one with the little ducks on it that she refused to let go of until she was 4 years old. A square from Ray's flannel shirt, the red plaid one he was wearing the day Maya was born. The one I had kept folded in a box in my closet for 16 years because I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. A square from my mother's kitchen curtain. A pale green cotton with tiny white flowers that had hung in that kitchen for 20 years, that I had taken down carefully after she passed and kept in the bottom of my cedar chest. I stitched it by hand every night after my shift. 9 months of work, same as Maya was carrying. Every stitch placed at my kitchen table under the overhead light, with my coffee going cold beside me and the house quiet around me. 9 months of love folded into squares. And then came the baby shower. I parked the Ford Escape in Marcus's driveway, and I could already see the balloon arch through the front window. Sandra, Marcus's mother, let's call her Sandra, had planned the whole thing. Catered food that smelled like it came from a catalog. A guest list that was overwhelmingly Marcus's side of things. I carried the quilt in a box I'd wrapped myself, and I walked through a room full of people who looked at my shoes before they looked at my face. You know that look. The quick glance down, then the recalibrated smile. I have been on the receiving end of that look for 20 years. It does not bother me anymore. It is just information. Maya opened the quilt, and her face broke open like light through a window. She pressed it to her cheek and she cried and she said, "Mom, you made this." Not a question. A recognition. She knew exactly what was in it. She knew because she remembered the blanket with the ducks, and the red plaid shirt, and the pale green curtains in her grandmother's kitchen. She held it against her chest and I watched her remember every person who loved her before she was old enough to know she needed protecting. Then Marcus picked it up. He picked it up by one corner, the way you'd pick up a wet towel someone had left on the bathroom floor. He held it away from his body like it was something distasteful. He looked at it. He looked at me. And then, in front of 40 people, his mother, his college friends, the catering staff, my daughter who was 7 months pregnant and sitting in the center of the room, he said it. "Your mom's just a lunch lady. She couldn't have just bought something from the registry." He dropped it on the floor. On the floor. In front of my daughter. In front of everyone. The room went quiet. Not the uncomfortable quiet of people deciding what to do. The practiced quiet. The quiet of people who had seen this man do something like this before and had already decided a long time ago that it was not their problem. Sandra laughed, half a beat too late, the way she always did, checking to see whether the joke had landed safely before fully committing to it. I looked at Maya's face. And this is the part one keep coming back to. It was not surprise. It was not embarrassment. It was not the face of a woman who had just watched her husband humiliate her mother in front of 40 people. And didn't know what to do. It was practice. Her eyes went flat. Her hands went still. Her expression smoothed over like water closing over a stone. That was not a woman caught off guard. That was a woman who had rehearsed keeping her face neutral so many times that it had become automatic. That was muscle memory. That was survival. I picked up my coat. Picked up my keys. I did not pick up the quilt. I did not say a single word. I walked to my car, started the engine, and sat in Marcus's driveway with both hands on the wheel until the shaking stopped. It was not from hurt. I have been hurt before and I know what that feels like. This was something colder. This was certainty. Something was very wrong inside my daughter's house. And the man who had just dropped my quilt on the floor was only the part one could see. I did not sleep that night. But I did something more useful. I opened my filing cabinet. Here is the thing about me. I keep records. I keep records the way my mother kept that cast iron skillet, religiously, consistently, without anyone asking me to. I have binders. I have folders. I have envelopes labeled by year. I am, and I say this with full self-awareness, the most boring person at any table. But boring people have paperwork. And paperwork has a way of mattering enormously when it matters most. I pulled the trust documents first. 8 years ago, after my mother passed, I took her inheritance, the duplex income, her savings, and every dollar I had set aside from my own paychecks over the course of years, and I put it into an irrevocable trust for Maya. $180,000. It was set up through Margaret. Let's call her Margaret, my trust and estate attorney, recommended by my friend Patty. Maya was supposed to access it when she turned 25, or earlier, for a first home. It was my mother's life. It was mine. It was supposed to be Maya's future. The foundation she would never have to dig for herself because the women before her had already broken that ground. I pulled the most recent annual statement. I looked at the balance. $38,000. Let me tell you something about money inside a family. Stops being money. It becomes the weight of every sacrifice someone made to earn it. Every hotel room my mother cleaned. Every vacation she didn't take. Every time she said, "I don't need new shoes. These are fine." $180,000 was not a number. It was my mother's entire working life, folded up and put away so her granddaughter would never have to start from the same place she had started. And now most of it was gone. I called Patty at 6 o'clock in the morning. Patty has worked the serving line at Jefferson Elementary for 14 years. She is the only person I trust to tell me the truth when the truth is ugly. She picked up on the second ring. I told her what happened at the shower. I told her about the trust. She was quiet for 10 full seconds, which, if you know Patty, is the equivalent of anyone else screaming out loud. "That man didn't just insult you," she said. "He showed you who he is in front of 40 people. That takes practice." "I know. And the money? I don't know yet. But I'm going to find out." "You'd better," she said. "And when you do, remember the garlic bread." I need to explain the garlic bread. In 2019, I was testing a new recipe for the cafeteria. A roasted garlic bread that I was unreasonably proud of. I left it in the industrial oven about 12 minutes too long, set off the fire alarm, and 2 fire trucks showed up at Jefferson Elementary on a perfectly ordinary Wednesday afternoon. 300 children were evacuated to the parking lot. The principal still brings it up at every single staff meeting for years later. Patty has never let me forget it. When she says, "Remember the garlic bread," she means, you have survived worse embarrassments than this. Stop standing still. Get moving. I called Margaret's office at 8 o'clock sharp. Her secretary pulled up the trust file. I could hear her typing. Then the typing stopped. "Mrs. Carroll," she said carefully, "you should come in today." I was in Margaret's office by 10. She had the file open on her desk. 6 withdrawal requests spread across the last 2.5 years. Every single one had Maya's signature on it. But here is the thing. I know my daughter's signature. I have 20 years of birthday cards, school permission slips, the original trust paperwork she signed when she was 15. I know the way she makes her capital letters. I know the particular loop she puts on certain letters. I know the way she signs her name when she's rushing and when she's careful. I know her handwriting the way I know her voice. The signatures on those withdrawal requests were close. But they were wrong in specific, consistent ways. The loops were too round. The angles were too soft. It was the signature of someone who had studied Maya's handwriting carefully and copied it, but couldn't quite get it right because they had never learned it the way a mother learns it. They had only ever traced it. I had brought the birthday cards, 20 years of them, in a manila envelope, because I am the kind of woman who keeps birthday cards in a manila envelope organized by year. Margaret held one card next to a withdrawal form. She didn't say anything for a long moment. She turned the card. She turned the form. She looked at me over her reading glasses. "Gloria," she said. She knew my real name. "I have been practicing trust law for 22 years. This is the first time I have ever seen someone forge a beneficiary's signature and also CC himself on the confirmation emails." She turned her monitor to face me. Marcus's personal email address. On all 6 confirmation emails. Every withdrawal. Every forged signature. Every single transaction. Neatly copied to a Gmail account with his first and last name in it. Like a man who had never once imagined the possibility of getting caught. Like a man who was so certain of his own invisibility that he had built himself a paper trail out of sheer carelessness. He had done Margaret's job for her. I want you to understand what $142,000 means in this context. That was my mother's whole life. Every hour she spent on her knees scrubbing floors in other people's homes. Every holiday she worked. Every year she chose not to buy herself something nice because she was saving. Every single act of quiet, invisible sacrifice that she made over 30 years, so that her granddaughter would have something solid to stand on. And a man who wore watches that cost more than my monthly mortgage payment had taken it. Carefully. Steadily. Over 2.5 years. Because he had looked at me and seen a lunch lady, and he had looked at my daughter and seen access. He had never once considered that the woman who smelled like garlic bread might have a filing cabinet worth opening. Margaret looked at me across her desk and said 4 words. What do you want to do? I already knew. Now I need you to pay close attention to what happened next because this is where the story gets worse before it gets better. And it gets significantly worse. Margaret filed subpoenas for Marcus's personal bank records and brokerage statements. She told me it would take a week, maybe 2. In the meantime, she said, do not confront him. Do not tell Maya yet. We need the full picture before we move. Half a picture gives him room to spin a story. A full picture gives us a case. I am not a patient woman by nature, but I am a woman who has worked in a school kitchen for 15 years. And if that teaches you anything at all, it teaches you how to wait for something to be ready. You do not pull bread out of the oven before the timer goes off just because you're hungry. You wait. And while you wait, you prepare everything else. So I waited. And while I waited, I paid attention. Let me tell you something about silence. People think silence is the absence of information. It is not. It is not empty. It is not neutral. It is not nothing. Silence is the loudest room in the house. You can learn more from what someone doesn't say than from anything they do say. My mother used to tell me, if someone stops talking when you walk into a room, they were talking about you. If someone stops talking when you ask them a question, they were lying to you. I called Maya that Wednesday, kept it casual, asked about the baby, asked about the nursery, asked about her next doctor's appointment, and then I asked about money. Not directly, I know better than that. I said, are you and Marcus getting the nursery ready? Paint, furniture, all of that adds up so fast. She hesitated. A pause the width of a single breath. Marcus handles all of that, she said. He's better with numbers than I am. When did you last log into your own bank account? I said. Silence. That silence told me everything a mother needs to know. It is the silence of a daughter who has rehearsed an answer she doesn't fully believe. Who has said the same thing so many times that it has started to sound reasonable, even to her. Mom, it's fine, she said. He set up a system. He gives me what I need every month. It's just easier. An allowance. My 23-year-old daughter, 7 months pregnant with her first child, was living on a monthly allowance from a man who had stolen her inheritance and was spending it on failing real estate investments. She didn't have access to her own money. She didn't know what was in her own accounts. She had been quietly, systematically cut off from her own financial life, and she had been told it was a system. She had been told it was easier. I kept my voice even. I said, that's good, baby. I'm glad he's on top of it. I hung up and I sat in my kitchen with the cast iron skillet hanging on its hook, and my coffee going cold in the mug in front of me. And I felt something I had not felt since the night Ray died. Not sadness. Not anger. The specific cold knowledge that someone I love is not safe, and that I am the only person who is going to do something about it. I drove to the duplex that afternoon. Nobody in Maya's life knows about the duplex. Nobody in Marcus's world has any idea that the woman who runs the lunch line at Jefferson Elementary owns rental property. I have owned it for 5 years. It is a modest 2-unit building, green siding, small yard. A tenant on one side and an empty unit on the other that I had been meaning to rent out since the previous tenant moved last spring. My mother bought it with 30 years of housekeeping income. 30 years of scrubbing other people's floors to own something of her own. I sat in the Ford Escape in the duplex parking lot. The dent in the passenger door caught the afternoon light in a way that made it look almost intentional, like a brushstroke. I pulled up Marcus's name on public records. Let me tell you something about public records. They are public. Anyone can look. Most people don't bother. I did. 3 LLCs registered in Marcus Whitfield's name. All real estate investment ventures. All losing money. One of them, an LLC called Whitfield Properties Group, which is a very confident name for a company that was hemorrhaging cash from every direction, was in pre-foreclosure. I pulled the registration documents. I read every page. And there, on the third page, was a name that made my stomach drop. Co-signer on Whitfield Properties Group, Sandra Whitfield. 30% ownership. Marcus's mother. The woman who had laughed half a beat too late when her son dropped my quilt on the floor. The woman who had planned that baby shower with catered food that smelled like a catalog. The woman who had watched her son systematically isolate and financially control my daughter, and had said nothing. She wasn't just watching. She was invested. Literally. 3 LLCs. 3 failing investments. 3 reasons Marcus needed my mother's money. And his own mother was co-signed on the biggest one. I want you to hold on to that detail because it matters enormously in what comes next. I called Margaret from the duplex parking lot. It's worse than we thought, I said. His mother is in it too. Margaret was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. Good, she said. That means there's a paper trail running in 2 directions. I started the car. The dent caught the light again. My mother bought this property with her hands. Marcus Whitfield was about to learn what those hands had built, and what the woman who inherited them was capable of protecting. The subpoenas came back on a Thursday. I remember because I had just finished a double shift, my feet were aching and I smelled as always like garlic bread. Margaret called and said, "Come in tomorrow. Bring coffee." It's a lot. It was a lot. I'm going to tell you exactly what we found because I think you deserve the full picture after sitting with me this far. Marcus had withdrawn $142,000 from Maya's trust over 2.5 years using forged signatures. The money had moved from the trust into his personal brokerage account and from there into his 3 LLCs. All 3 were underwater. The money was gone, not stolen and hidden somewhere clever, but stolen and lost, which is somehow even worse. There is nothing elegant about it. It was just a man with terrible ideas and someone else's money, and he burned through it like it was nothing because to him it was nothing. It wasn't his sacrifice. It wasn't his mother's 30 years. It was just a number on a statement that he had figured out how to access. But that was not the worst part. Margaret set a single sheet of paper in front of me on her desk. A credit application. Maya's name. Maya's social security number. A $60,000 line of credit opened 14 months ago. Current balance. $58,400. My daughter. 7 months pregnant. Living on a monthly allowance from a man she trusted completely. Was $58,000 in debt on a line of credit she had never agreed to. A line of credit she did not know existed. A line of credit that had been opened in her name with a forged signature, while she was sleeping next to the man who opened it. Carol. Margaret said my name quietly. Your son-in-law didn't just steal from your daughter's trust. He opened a line of credit in her name. She is $58,000 in debt. And she does not know it. I looked at my daughter's name on that signature line. I looked at the signature that wasn't hers. What do I need to do? I said. You need to tell Maya. And then Maya needs to decide if she wants to press charges. She'll press charges, I said. She just doesn't know it yet. Let me tell you something about the word family. People drag that word out when they want something from you. It's the word that appears at Thanksgiving when someone needs a loan they won't pay back. It's the word a man uses when he wants you to stop asking questions. It's the word a mother uses when she wants you to forgive her son for something that should not be forgiven and never will be. Marcus used the word family to get a wife. Sandra used it to get a daughter-in-law who wouldn't ask questions. And for 2.5 years it worked. Because my daughter loved her husband and wanted to believe that family meant what she had always believed it meant. Safety, loyalty. Someone who would never deliberately destroy you. Felony forgery. 6 counts. Felony identity theft. Wire fraud. I sat with those words for a full minute before I spoke again. I was not angry in the way that screams. I was angry in the way that files. I was angry in the way that makes lists. I was angry in the way that my mother was angry, quietly, completely, and with extraordinary patience. I had one more thing to do before I talked to Maya. And it was the hardest thing I have ever done. The day I drove to Maya's house was the hardest day of my life. Harder than losing Ray. Harder than burying my mother. Because grief is clean. It hurts you, but it doesn't require you to break someone you love in order to save them. This required both. In the same conversation, at the same kitchen table, I brought 3 things. The quilt. I had taken it home from the baby shower and spent 2 evenings repairing the corner where Marcus had crumpled it when he dropped it. I restitched the binding with the same thread I had used for 9 months. Every stitch deliberate. Every stitch a refusal to let him win even that small thing. The manila envelope of birthday cards. 20 years of Maya's real signature. And the withdrawal forms with the forged ones. Maya opened the door. Marcus was at work. The house was quiet. Too quiet, too staged. Too clean in the way of a house where someone controls everything and warmth is not permitted to accumulate. The kitchen looked like a showroom. It looked like a kitchen where nobody ever cooked because nobody was ever given the chance to feel at home enough to cook. I set the quilt on the table between us. I set the birthday cards beside it. I set the withdrawal forms on the other side. Baby, I said, I need to tell you something. And I need you to let me finish before you say anything. Let me tell you something about mothers and daughters. Your daughter is the first person you ever learn to protect and the last person you ever want to hurt. When she was 3, I could fix anything with a Band-Aid and a popsicle. When she was 13, I could fix most things with a drive to get ice cream and a long conversation where I mostly listened. At 23, married, pregnant, sitting across from me at a table covered in evidence that her husband had stolen her future, I could not fix anything without first breaking the life she thought she had. I had to do both at the same time. I told her everything. The trust. The withdrawals. The forged signatures. The LLCs. Sandra's involvement as co-signer. The pre-foreclosure. The paper trail that ran from my mother's life savings directly into Marcus's failing business ventures. And then last, because it was the worst, the line of credit. Her name. Her social security number. $58,000 of debt she had never agreed to and never knew existed. Maya's face went through stages and I watched every single one. Confusion first, the kind where your eyes move but your face stays still because your brain is trying to sort information that doesn't fit into the life you thought you were living. Then denial, brief, reflexive, like a flinch before you know you've been hit. That can't be right, she said. But she didn't say it like she believed it. She said it like a prayer that she already knew wasn't going to be answered. Then the stillness. The terrible, specific stillness that I recognized because I had seen it in my own mirror in the days after Ray died, when the shock wore off and the math began. The stillness of someone calculating what comes next when the ground has disappeared beneath them. Maya picked up her phone. She logged into the bank account, the one she hadn't accessed in over a year. The one Marcus had told her he was handling. She found the line of credit. She found the balance. $58,400. Her hands were shaking. I reached across the table and held them. How long have you known? She said. 3 weeks, I said. I needed to have the answers before I brought you the questions. She looked at me. She looked at the quilt. And then she picked it up and held it against her chest. And I watched her fingers find the square of Ray's flannel shirt without looking. The same way she used to find the corner of her baby blanket in the dark, by memory, by love, by the specific knowledge of something that had always been there when she needed it. What do we do? She said. I gave her the plan. Margaret would file criminal charges. Forgery, identity theft, wire fraud. I had already spoken with a family law attorney who could handle the divorce proceedings. The protective order paperwork was ready. And my duplex, the one nobody in Marcus's world had ever heard of, the one my mother bought with her hands, had an empty unit. The room my mother used to sleep in when she visited. You move in tonight, I said. She didn't hesitate. Not for a second. Patty called while Maya was packing. I stepped into the hallway to answer. How did she take it? Patty said. Like her mother's daughter, I said. Good. Listen. I'm going to say one thing and you're going to let me say it. Patty took a breath. That man called you a lunch lady in front of 40 people. You are about to serve him something he is never going to forget. I almost laughed. Almost. Patty, that's terrible. It's accurate. Call me tomorrow. Buy garlic bread. You're going to need the comfort. Maya packed a bag that night. She moved into my duplex. She slept in the room my mother used to sleep in the building my mother bought with 30 years of work, under a roof that no one could take from her because it belonged to me and I had never told a single person in Marcus's world that it existed. And the next morning Margaret filed. Now I need you to understand what happened next, because this is the part where the man who dropped my quilt on the floor came to my front porch and found out exactly what a lunch lady keeps in her filing cabinet. And I need you to understand that what happened on that porch was only the beginning of what he was about to face. 2 days after Maya moved out, Marcus was served. All of it at once on the same day. Margaret had timed it that way on purpose. Criminal charges. 6 counts of felony forgery, 1 count of felony identity theft, wire fraud. A civil suit for full trust restitution with interest. And from Maya, divorce papers and a petition for a protective order, filed simultaneously, so there was no window in which he could regroup or reframe or call in favors. When Margaret says when you move once and you move completely, she means it. Marcus called my phone 3 times that afternoon. I did not answer. I was making soup. I have found over the years that soup is the most useful thing to make when the world is rearranging itself because it takes a long time and requires a great deal of chopping, and chopping is remarkably satisfying when you are holding a very specific kind of cold-focused anger. Then the doorbell rang. Patty was at my kitchen table. She had come over with a casserole and stayed, which is what Patty always does in a crisis. She arrives with food and remains until the situation is resolved. She looked at me. I looked at the door. I opened it. Marcus was on my porch. His tie was loosened. His hair was wrong. The polish was gone, or rather it was still there in the suit and the shoes and the watch, but it had cracked around the edges, and underneath the crack you could see the actual man, and the actual man was frightened. His face had the look of someone who had just been served 6 felony charges, and was still trying to figure out how to pitch it. Still trying to find the angle. Still reaching for charm because charm had always worked before, because he had never once in his life stood in front of a woman who couldn't be charmed. Behind him in my driveway, Sandra sat in her car with the engine running. Getaway driver. I am not making that up. His mother drove him to my house and sat in the car with the engine running like they were robbing a bank. The audacity of it was almost impressive. Gloria, he said. He smiled. It was the smile of a man deploying his last reliable tool. This is a misunderstanding. We're family. Can we just talk about this like family? Family, I said. That is a word you use when you want something. Right now what you want is for me to drop the charges. The smile tightened. Recalculated. He shifted to his second approach. Look, Maya agreed to everything. She knew about the investments. We made those decisions together. Maya's signature was forged, I said. I have 20 years of birthday cards that prove it, and you CC'd yourself on every single confirmation email, Marcus. Everyone. You did the prosecutor's job for them. I watched his face in the moment he understood that I had seen the emails. It was not guilt. Guilt comes later, if it comes at all for men like him. It was the sudden physical comprehension that he had been caught by a person he had dismissed completely. His jaw moved. His eyes went to the driveway, to his mother, as if she could help him from behind the windshield of a running car. She couldn't. She was next. You're going to destroy your daughter's marriage, he said. Gambit 3. The threat dressed up as concern for someone other than himself. You destroyed it when you put her $58,000 in debt without her knowledge, I said. You destroyed it when you stole her grandmother's life savings to fund businesses you knew were failing. You destroyed it when you gave your wife a monthly allowance and cut her off from her own finances while she was carrying your child. The front door of Sandra's car opened. She walked up my porch steps in heels that were entirely wrong for my concrete steps, and she put her hand on my arm, gently, pleadingly, and she said, Carol, please. He's my son. He made mistakes. He's my son. She started to cry. I want to be fair. I don't know if the tears were real. I do know they had served her in this exact way before. I could tell by how quickly they arrived and how perfectly they were deployed. I do know that she had co-signed a failing LLC that was funded with stolen money from my mother's trust. I do know that she had laughed, half a beat too late, when her son dropped my quilt on the floor in front of 40 people. I do know that she had watched her son isolate and financially control my daughter for 2.5 years and had never once said a word to me. Whatever those tears were, they were not going to move me. They had worked on Maya for years. That was finished now. I looked at Marcus. I looked at Sandra. And I said what I had been thinking since the moment I sat in my car in Marcus's driveway after the baby shower, with my hands on the wheel, waiting for the shaking to stop. You looked at me at that baby shower and you saw a lunch lady. You picked up the quilt my daughter was crying over, and you dropped it on the floor because you had already decided I wasn't worth your consideration. That quilt had a piece of Maya's baby blanket in it. It had a piece of her father's shirt, the shirt he was wearing the day she was born. It had a piece of my mother's kitchen curtains, the ones that hung in her house for 20 years while she saved every dollar she could so her granddaughter would have something to stand on. I took a breath. I kept my voice completely level. But here's the thing about lunch ladies, Marcus. We get up at 5 o'clock in the morning. We feed 300 children before you've had your first cup of coffee. We work double shifts and we drive dented cars and we season our skillets on Sunday mornings, and we keep very, very careful records. And we have been watching you since the first dinner. I stepped back inside. I closed the door. It is a solid oak door, original to the house, and it closed with the sound of something finished. Something over. Something that would not be reopened. I went to the kitchen. I picked up the cast iron skillet. I started heating oil. Patty looked at me from the table. "You are genuinely terrifying," she said. "I'm hungry," I said. "There's a difference." "There really isn't," she said. "And you smell like garlic bread." "I always smell like garlic bread." "I know. I'm just reminding you so you don't get too scary. Now let me tell you exactly how the justice landed, because you have earned it after sitting with me through all of this." Margaret worked fast. Marcus was formally charged on all counts. 6 counts of felony forgery, 1 count of felony identity theft, wire fraud charges filed in addition. His firm put him on unpaid leave the same week the charges were filed, because it turns out that commercial real estate companies do not love it when their associates are facing multiple felony charges involving forged documents and stolen funds. His professional reputation, which had been the whole of his identity, evaporated in approximately 72 hours. Sandra was named as a co-conspirator in the LLC fraud. The co-signed LLC Whitfield Properties Group, with its very confident name, went into foreclosure proceedings. Her 30% ownership became 30% of a liability instead of an asset, and she was looking at her own legal exposure on top of everything else. The trust was frozen and recovery proceedings began. Margaret told me to expect to recover 70 to 80% through seized LLC assets and Marcus's brokerage account. It would take time, but it was coming back. My mother's money was coming back. And then the detail that made me sit down at my kitchen table and put my face in my hands for a full minute, the fraudulent line of credit. The $58,000 in Maya's name. The bank opened a formal investigation the week the charges were filed. Within 6 weeks, the debt was removed from Maya's credit record entirely. $58,000. Gone. Erased. As if it had never existed, except it had existed and someone had put it there, and that someone was now standing in front of a judge in a suit he could no longer afford, because his assets were frozen and his attorney was court-appointed. The divorce moved fast. Marcus did not contest it. He had nothing left to contest with. The protective order was granted without opposition. Marcus Whitfield, commercial real estate associate, watch collector, the man who had once held a handmade quilt by one corner and dropped it on the floor in front of 40 people because he thought its maker wasn't worth his respect, moved into his mother's guest room. I want to tell you what justice sounds like because people always imagine it louder than it is. It doesn't sound like screaming. It doesn't sound like a crowd cheering or a gavel banging dramatically, or any of the things you see in movies about righteous revenge. It sounds like a woman in a black robe reading charges into a microphone on a quiet Tuesday morning, in a room that smells like old carpet and fluorescent lighting, while the man who called me just a lunch lady stands in a suit he can no longer pay for and says, "Yes, Your Honor," in a voice that has lost every last ounce of polish it ever had. Think about that. Really think about it. But I'm not done. Because there was one more thing that happened, and it happened in that same courtroom, and I want you to have it. Sandra had hired her own attorney. A good one, because she still had money that hadn't been frozen yet. During the proceedings, her attorney argued that she had been unaware of the source of the funds going into Whitfield Properties Group. That she had trusted her son. That she was a victim too. Margaret had anticipated this. She had subpoenaed Sandra's personal email account as part of the co-conspirator filing. And in that email account, sent from Marcus to Sandra 14 months ago, 3 weeks after he opened the fraudulent line of credit in Maya's name, was a message with the subject line, "Update on the Alvarez Trust." In it, Marcus had told his mother exactly what he was doing, exactly where the money was coming from, and Sandra had replied with 2 words, "Be careful." Not "stop." Not "this is wrong." Not "you cannot steal from your pregnant wife's inheritance." 2 words, "Be careful." The judge read that email into the record. Sandra's attorney went very quiet. Sandra herself went the color of old chalk. Margaret leaned over to me and said nothing. She didn't need to. 2 months later, my granddaughter was born. Maya named her Rose after my mother. I was in the delivery room. I held Maya's hand and told her she was strong over and over. The same words my mother had said to me when Maya was born. And I did not cry until the baby was out and breathing and placed on Maya's chest. And then I cried, and I am not going to apologize for it. Some things earn your tears. Some things have been a long time coming, and when they finally arrive, your body knows it before your mind does. I went home that night and put the cast iron skillet on the stove. I made garlic bread because it is the only thing I know how to make when I don't know what else to do. The kitchen smelled like every kitchen my mother ever worked in. And I stood there in the low blue light of the stove and I seasoned that skillet the way she taught me. Slow. Careful. No shortcuts. You cannot rush the seasoning. It has to build over time. Layer by layer. That's how it holds. A week later, Maya and Rose came home to the duplex. My mother's room. I had painted it pale green, the same color as my mother's kitchen curtains. I didn't tell Maya why I'd chosen that color. She walked in, looked at the walls, looked at me and started crying. She knew. Of course she knew. I wrapped Rose in the quilt. The quilt that Marcus had picked up by one corner and dropped on the floor. The quilt with the duck blanket and the red plaid flannel shirt, and the pale green cotton with the tiny white flowers. Every square holding someone who had loved Maya before Marcus Whitfield ever existed. Every stitch placed by a woman who got up at 5 in the morning and fed other people's children and drove a car with a dent in the door, and kept birthday cards in a filing cabinet. Rose didn't know any of that. She was warm in it. She made the small sound that newborns make when they're comfortable. Like a question that's already answered. That was enough. That was more than enough. Patty called while I was holding Rose in the kitchen. "So let me get this straight," Patty said. "The man who called you just a lunch lady is living in his mother's guest room. His LLCs are in foreclosure, he's facing felony charges, and you own the duplex your daughter is living in." "That's correct," I said. "And the duplex next to it." "Patty, I also own the house." There was a long silence. "I am never making fun of your filing cabinets again," she said. "You will," I said. "You'll start again by Monday." "Probably," she said. "But I mean it right now in this moment. I genuinely mean it." I looked at the skillet on the stove. I looked at the quilt around my granddaughter. Through the kitchen window I could see the Ford Escape in the driveway, the dent catching the streetlight the way it always does, the way it has since 2019, the way it probably will until I finally get it fixed, which I will not. A delivery driver from the pizza place on the corner walked past, looked in through the window and saw a woman in a kitchen that smelled like garlic bread, holding a baby wrapped in a patchwork quilt. He smiled and kept walking. Life continues. It always does. Let me tell you one last thing. I am a lunch lady. I have been a lunch lady for 15 years. I feed other people's children every single day, and I raised my own, and I kept careful records of every dollar that was supposed to keep her safe. I drove a dented car and wore the same shoes 2 seasons running and put every extra dollar into a trust, and a duplex and a filing cabinet full of birthday cards. I seasoned a cast iron skillet every Sunday morning the way my mother taught me, because that is how you build something that lasts. Layer by layer. No shortcuts. No rushing. Marcus Whitfield looked at my hands and saw someone who wasn't worth his time. He looked at my car and saw someone who couldn't hurt him. He looked at my filing cabinet and didn't see it at all, because boring objects are beneath the attention of men who collect expensive watches and give their wives a monthly allowance and call their mothers-in-law just a lunch lady in front of 40 people. He should have looked at the filing cabinet. My mother taught me that the quietest woman in the room is usually the one keeping score. I taught my daughter the same thing, sitting at the kitchen table while I stitched her grandmother's curtains into a quilt. And now I am going to teach her daughter, Rose, named after the woman who bought a duplex with 30 years of housekeeping money, and left it to a daughter who knew how to use it. I made the quilt after all. 9 months of stitching. Every square a piece of someone who loved her. And she is warm in it. That is what a lunch lady keeps in her filing cabinet. That is what a lunch lady builds when no one is watching. And that is what happens when a man who has never been held accountable for anything in his life finally meets a woman who has kept every receipt.